Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Federal investigators are probing the death of 66-year-old accused serial sex abuser and trafficker Jeffrey Epstein after he was found dead in his Manhattan jail cell Saturday morning. The authorities say he died by suicide, by hanging. Jeffrey Epstein was reportedly unsupervised in his cell despite being put on suicide watch in July after he was found unconscious with marks on his neck. He'd since been removed from suicide watch, but should have been checked by guards every 30 minutes and was supposed to have had a cellmate, neither of which were the case at the time of his death. Epstein's death came less than 24 hours. Hundreds of pages of court documents were unsealed with testimonies from former employees and new details of sexual abuse committed by Epstein, which also implicated a number of well-known politicians and others in the public eye, including former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson, former Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell, Alan Dershowitz, the Harvard Law professor, Prince Andrew, and a well-known prime minister. Many have denied the allegations. As public speculation mounted following news of his death, President Trump joined in by retweeting, without evidence, a conspiracy theory that Epstein's death was the result of foul play by the Clintons. Epstein's accusers spoke out over the weekend. Jennifer Rose, who last month came forward to say Epstein raped her when she was 15, said in a statement, "We have to live with the scars of his actions for the rest of our lives, while he will never face the consequences of the crimes he committed, the pain and trauma he caused so many people. Epstein is gone, but justice must still be served. I hope the authorities will pursue and prosecute his accomplices and enablers and ensure redress for his victims," she said. New York prosecutors said the investigation into Epstein's alleged crimes would continue despite his death. We'll have more on this story after headlines with the Miami Herald senior editor for investigations, Casey Frank. In Hong Kong, where mass popular protests are now in their 10th week, officials have closed the international airport, grounding all flights. Many protesters are now rushing to clear the airport, fearing threats of more police action, but hundreds of activists remain. Thousands of pro-democracy demonstrators gathered over the weekend to protest police brutality and call for pro-democracy reforms, as they say the Beijing-aligned government is attempting to weaken Hong Kong's autonomy. Clashes broke out between protesters and police forces, turning especially violent Sunday night as riot police fired tear gas inside a subway station and were filmed beating protesters with batons. Meanwhile, mainland China has been ramping up actions to oppose the demonstrations. Last week, China ordered Hong Kong-based airline Cathay Pacific to suspend any staff who support pro-democracy protests. We'll have more on Hong Kong later in the broadcast. In Russia, up to 60,000 protesters gathered in Moscow Saturday for the 5th mass demonstration in a month, and the largest demonstration Russia has witnessed for years. Dozens were arrested in Moscow as well as other cities around the country. Saturday's protest was organized to denounce the recent barring of opposition candidates from running in an upcoming election for the Moscow City Council. We'll have more later in the broadcast with the New School's Nina Kushcheva. Questions are mounting over last Thursday's explosion in the White Sea off the northern coast of Russia, which killed at least 7 people, mostly nuclear scientists. The blast caused a radiation spike in the surrounding area in Russia, and U.S. experts suspect it was caused during a test of a nuclear-powered cruise missile. This comes as concerns are growing over a renewed nuclear arms race between the U.S. and Russia, following Trump's withdrawal from the landmark Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. Earlier this month, Russia's foreign ministry called the INF Treaty formally dead. In Norway, police say the suspected gunman who attacked a mosque near the capital Oslo Saturday has a history of posting white supremacist content online. The man, who is identified by local press as 22-year-old Philip Monshaus, praised the mass shooting in El Paso last weekend, which targeted Mexican immigrants, an April shooting in a San Diego synagogue. He also praised the massacre in Christchurch, New Zealand, which killed 51 Muslim worshippers in March. Saturday's shooting at the Al-Noor Islamic Center, which injured one 75-year-old worshipper who helped tackle the gunman, is being investigated as a possible act of terrorism. After the attack, the dead body of the suspected shooter's stepsister was found at his home. She was 17 years old. In last week's mass shooting in Dayton, Ohio, the gunman shot and killed his sister, along with 8 others. This is Irfan Mushtaq, the director of the mosque in Oslo.
For so many years, the secret police says the Muslims are the biggest risk in this country. But if you look at those last 2 major incidents of terrorist activities, it's non-Muslims who have done this. So, and this is affecting our children because the identity of our children has been broken up. We are harassed on a daily basis. It's time for the Norwegian government to take a clear standpoint what they're going to do moving forward to make us secure more.
In Yemen, officials from the UN recognized government conceded defeat Sunday to the United Arab Emirates in the port city of Aden after southern separatists took control of government military camps in the presidential palace. This came after days of fighting that killed a reported 40 people, including civilians. Saudi Arabia threw its support behind Yemen's exiled president as the Saudi-UAE coalition appeared to fracture over recent days. The International Crisis Group warned Friday the situation in Aden, quote, threatened to tip southern Yemen into a civil war within a civil war. Tens of thousands have been killed by fighting in Yemen since 2015, and the ensuing food crisis has caused the death by starvation of an estimated 85,000 people. In occupied East Jerusalem, Israeli forces fired tear gas, sound grenades and rubber bullets inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque Sunday as Palestinians gathered for the first day of Eid al-Adha. Dozens of Palestinians were injured in the attack. Clashes arose after authorities allowed hundreds of religious Israeli Jews to enter the holy site of Al-Aqsa for prayer during Eid. Jews are usually allowed to enter the site but are not permitted to pray there. Palestinian diplomat and member of the Palestine Liberation Organization, Hanan Shrawi, said, quote, the storming of Al-Aqsa Mosque compound by Israeli occupation forces this Eid morning is an act of recklessness and aggression, unquote. The clashes at Al-Aqsa Mosque came as Israeli soldiers killed 5 men in Gaza at the separation barrier with Israel. The Israeli military said it fatally shot 4 armed Palestinians Saturday and another man on Sunday. In Guatemala, Alejandro Giammattei of the ultra-conservative Vamos party won the presidency after a runoff vote Sunday where he faced off against former First Lady Sandra Torres. He got 58% of the vote, with just 42% of eligible voters casting ballots. Giammattei, a former head of Guatemala's prison system, ran on a law and order platform promising to bring back the death penalty and deploy soldiers to the streets. He's been accused of money laundering, ties to drug traffickers, and extrajudicial killings. Giammattei has said he wants to modify the controversial immigration deal signed last month between President Trump and the outgoing president, Jimmy Morales. The deal requires asylum seekers heading to the U.S. border to apply for asylum in Guatemala instead of at the U.S.-Mexico border and would primarily affect Honduran and Salvadoran migrants. Back in the U.S., former Vice President, 2020 presidential hopeful Joe Biden is coming under fire after he contrasted poor kids with white kids at an event hosted by the Iowa Asian and Latino Coalition.
We have this notion that somehow if you're poor, you cannot do it. Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids, wealthy kids, black kids, Asian kids.
Biden later said he misspoke while delivering his remarks. On Saturday, Biden said that survivors from the Parkland massacre visited him when he was vice president, when in fact the mass shooting took place last year, over a year after Biden's tenure in the White House. In a victory for transgender rights, a federal judge ruled Friday that a Virginia school board's policy which barred a transgender student from using the bathroom that corresponded to his gender identity is unconstitutional. The case was brought by the ACLU on behalf of Gavin Grimm, a former Virginia student. Judge Arenda Wright Allen wrote, quote, "Transgender students are singled out, subjected to discriminatory treatment, and excluded from spaces where similarly situated students are permitted to go," unquote. Grimm celebrated the ruling, tweeting, "I promise to continue to advocate for as long as it takes for everyone to be able to live their authentic lives freely in public and without harassment and discrimination." To see our interview with Gavin Grimm, go to democracynow.org. Four-time Olympic gold medalist Simone Biles won her 6th U.S. national championship Sunday, completing 2 historic moves in the process. She became the first woman to land a double backflip with 3 twists in a floor competition, one day after she became the first person ever to complete 2 twists and 2 somersaults coming off the balance beam. During an interview with reporters at the championship games last week, Biles called out USA Gymnastics for failing to protect young athletes from Dr. Larry Nassar, the former team doctor who was sentenced for up to 175 years in prison for sexually assaulting and abusing more than 160 young female athletes, including Biles. Last year, Biles revealed she was a survivor of Nassar's abuse.
It's hard coming here for an organization and having had them fail us so many times. And we had won gold. We've done everything that they asked us for, even when we didn't want to, and they couldn't do one damn job. You had one job. You literally had one job, and you couldn't protect us.
In more sports news, 2 U.S. athletes used their victories at the Pan American Games in Peru to protest President Trump and U.S. policies as they took to the podium. Hammer thrower Gwen Berry raised her fist at the end of the national anthem after accepting her gold medal. She told USA Today Sports, quote, "Somebody has to talk about the things that are too uncomfortable to talk about. Somebody has to stand for all of the injustices that are going on in America and a president who's making it worse," she said. A day earlier, Ray Simboden, a member of the gold-winning men's fencing team, took the knee while on the podium. He later tweeted, "We must call for change. This week, I'm honored to represent Team USA at the Pan Am Games, taking home gold and bronze. My pride, however, has been cut short by the multiple shortcomings of the country I hold so dear to my heart: racism, gun control, mistreatment of immigrants, and a president who spreads hate are at the top of a long list," he tweeted. The U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee said Bowden could face disciplinary action for his protest. An acclaimed Chilean economist and environmentalist, Manfred Max Neef, has died. He died Thursday at the age of 86. Max Neef taught economics at various colleges, including the University of California, Berkeley, and the Austral University of Chile, where he taught until last year. He promoted development alternatives to address poverty. In 1993, he ran as an independent for president of Chile. Manfred Max Neef won the Right Livelihood Award, known as the Alternative Nobel Prize, in 1983, 2 years after the publication of his book Outside Looking In: Experiences in Barefoot Economics. This is Manfred Max Neef speaking to Democracy Now! In 2010 in Bonn, Germany.
In poverty, there is an enormous creativity. You cannot be an idiot if you want to survive. Every minute you have to be thinking, what next? What do I know? What trick can I do here? What is that? So your creativity is constant. In addition, I mean, that is combined, with networks of cooperation, mutual aid, and all sort of extraordinary things, which you no longer find in our dominant society, which is individualistic, greedy, egoistical.
That was Chilean economist and environmentalist Dr. Manfred Max Neef speaking in 2010. He died last week at his home in Valdivia, Chile, at the age of 86. To see our full interview with him, you can go to democracynow.org. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.